It is April 24th, 1854, 7 in the evening, and 15,000 candles flicker inside the Augustinian church in Vienna. 24-year-old Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph I is marrying his 16-year-old cousin, Elizabeth of Bavaria, nicknamed Sisi. The bride is dressed in a gown embroidered with silver. The emperor can't take his eyes off her, and she is clearly in love with him as well. It all looks like the final scene of a fairy tale. In reality, it is only the beginning of a great story full of uncertainty and twists. Sisi was born on Christmas Day in 1837 in Munich, but spent most of her childhood in the countryside. Although she came from the noble house of Wittelsbach and held the title of Bavarian princess, she did not spend much time studying court etiquette. Instead, from a young age, she rode horses, swam, and wandered in nature. Everything changed in 1853 when she traveled with her mother and 3 oldest siblings to Bad Ischl to celebrate the birthday of her cousin Franz Joseph I. At that time, Franz Joseph's mother, Sophie, was trying to find a suitable bride for him, and Sisi's older sister Helena, nicknamed Nene, seemed like a good candidate. But from the first moment, it was clear that Franz was more captivated by his younger cousin, with her long dark hair and slender waist. The attraction was mutual, and just 8 months later, the wedding took place, with the young couple formally married by the Archbishop of Vienna. Although Sisi loves her husband, the reality of court life soon begins to crush her. The strict rules, enforced with a watchful eye by her aunt and mother-in-law in one, become even stricter after Sisi gives birth to her first daughter in 1855. According to Imperial protocol, she is not allowed to nurse the child herself, and much of the care is taken over by her mother-in-law, after whom the baby Sophie is named. The same happens a year later with their second daughter, Gisela. Sisi takes it very hard, and the disagreements gradually begin to affect her relationship with her husband.
Prosím vás, arcivévodkyně mi nesmí mou holčičku vzít. Prosím, řekněte jí to.
Odnesu ji jen na kojení, vždyť víte, uklidněte se. Musíte odpočívat.
When it came to politics, the wives of emperors usually did not interfere, but Sisi did have influence over her husband. During a trip to Italy, for example, she persuaded him to pardon local political prisoners. In 1857, the imperial family traveled to Hungary, which the empress instantly fell in love with thanks to its more relaxed atmosphere. She even began learning the Hungarian language, and she later lobbied her husband to strengthen Hungary's position within his empire. All of this is ultimately overshadowed by a family tragedy. 2-year-old daughter Sophie dies of typhus in Buda, now part of Budapest. Devastated, Sisi falls into depression and loses interest both in her younger daughter Gisela and later in her son Rudolf, who is born the following year. At the same time, the Austrian monarchy itself is going through difficult times. The Kingdom of Sardinia, which at that time includes the region of Piedmont in northern Italy, decides to unify the fragmented Italian states and joins forces with France. The so-called Second Italian War of Independence culminates in June 1859 with the Battle of Solferino, which Austria loses. As a result, Austria must give up one of its richest provinces, Lombardy. The outcome of the battle marks the first step toward a united Italy and, on the losing Austrian side, causes the fall of Interior Minister Alexander Bach, who for the past 8 years had built a strict bureaucratic system based on the power of the secret police. All these events deeply affect the Empress, who feels increasingly unwell, and the former spark of the country girl fades. During her life, doctors diagnosed Sisi with a range of illnesses. Today, historians agree that most of her health issues were likely psychosomatic. At the start of the new decade, specialists recommend a change of environment. So Sisi leaves her family in Vienna and travels with her ladies-in-waiting to the Portuguese island of Madeira. She spends long weeks there, cut off from her husband and children, focusing on her interests and, of course, her appearance. She is especially proud of her long, thick hair and slim waist. At the same time, she lives in constant fear of gaining weight. At her residences, she has built gyms where she trains regularly. She weighs herself up to 3 times a day and turns to increasingly extreme dieting methods. She drinks raw meat juice and even has all chairs removed from her room so she won't be tempted to rest. At 5 feet 8 inches tall, she weighs just 110 pounds.
Pevněji. Víc to nejde výsosti. Tolik jste zhubla.
Washing her hair is almost a ritual. It takes place twice a month, and instead of shampoo, she uses a mix of egg yolks and rubbing alcohol, finishing with a rinse made from walnut shell extract. During her daily 2-hour hair brushing, the Empress studies foreign languages, especially Hungarian and later Greek. The rest of her time is filled with outings alongside her ladies-in-waiting, among whom she is closest to a young Hungarian, Ida von Ferenczy. Far from home, her duties, and her mother-in-law, she feels better with each passing day. By May 1861, Sisi manages to visit Seville, Gibraltar, Mallorca and Corfu before returning to Austria and to her family. But soon, a strong cough troubles her again, and within a month she heads back south. On the Greek island of Corfu, which she falls in love with, she builds a palace dedicated to Achilles and also visits Venice and spa towns in Switzerland. When she finally returns home in 1862, little Rudolf is 4, Gisela is 6, and the situation in the empire is anything but stable. More and more Austrian regions are demanding autonomy, and the Kingdom of Italy, formed in 1861 by unifying most of the Italian peninsula, is eager to annex the area around Venice, which at that time still belongs to Austria. In 1866, as the Austro-Prussian War breaks out over dominance in the German-speaking part of Europe, Italian King Victor Emmanuel II forms an alliance with Prussian Chancellor Bismarck. Just 2 months later, after Austria suffers a crushing defeat at the Battle of Königgrätz, it loses not only prestige but also another important territory in northern Italy. Under the weight of these events, the weakened emperor is forced to compromise, and in 1867, the so-called Austria-Hungary is established. The empire will now be organized as a dual monarchy, with the Kingdom of Hungary having its own parliament. Both countries will still be ruled by Franz Joseph I, now as Emperor of Austria and King of Hungary. It is, in a way, the fulfillment of the discussions about equality for the Hungarians that the emperor once had with Sisi during their visit to Hungary 10 years earlier. The Hungarians adore their new queen, and she, despite once saying that children are a woman's curse because they steal all her beauty, gives birth to her 4th child, daughter Marie Valerie, in Hungary, 10 months after the coronation. Unlike her often neglected older siblings, she absolutely adores her. She calls her my only one, and this time takes full charge of her upbringing. She takes her along on her travels and finally gives full expression to her maternal feelings. The years pass, and although the Empress no longer sees much of her husband or her remaining children, the tragic events of 1889 hit her hard. Her nearly 30-year-old son Rudolf had been unwell for some time. He suffered from bronchitis, rheumatism, and bladder inflammations, and also had incurable gonorrhea. As the heir to the throne, he led a hectic life and drowned his stress and depression in alcohol. On top of that, his marriage to Belgian Princess Stephanie was unhappy. At the end of January 1889, Rudolf travels with his 17-year-old mistress, Mary Wetzera, who is 4 months pregnant, to the hunting lodge at Mayerling in Western Austria. They write farewell letters, and in the early morning of January 30th, both take their own lives. Sisi and Franz Joseph lose their only son, and Austria loses its heir to the throne. Sisi is 51 at the time of the tragedy, and afterwards she withdraws even more from public life. She wears almost exclusively black dresses and often travels incognito. Under a pseudonym, in September 1898, she departs for Geneva. However, the hotel staff there is not particularly discreet, and news of the distinguished guest soon spreads far and wide. Unfortunately, the information reaches Italian anarchist Luigi Lucchini, who had planned to target French Prince Henri of Orleans. But when the prince doesn't show up, Lucchini changes his plan. On September 10, 1898, Sisi walks with her lady-in-waiting, Countess Irma Starai, to the Geneva harbour to board a boat to Montreux. On the way, Lucchini approaches them, and the Empress suddenly collapses. At that moment, no one, not even she, realizes that the attacker has stabbed her in the chest with a narrow file. After a moment, the Empress gets back on her feet with the help of her companion and, confused, walks with her to the boat. But she faints several times and eventually whispers, "What has happened to me?" We now know these were her last words. When the captain realizes who she is, he turns the boat back to Geneva, and crew members carry the Empress to her hotel room. Half an hour later, the doctor declares that there is nothing more that can be done. At 60 years old, thus ended the life of a woman who, at first glance, had everything one could wish for: beauty, wealth, a successful husband, and political influence. But the ever restless and unhappy Sisi saw her life differently. In one of her poems, she wrote, "I'm a seagull. I have no land, no shore I ever call my strand. I'm here a while, then drift away. From wave to wave I make my way." Still, for the people of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, their Sisi was a charismatic woman with compassion for the poor and a desire to help. And when we add her extraordinary beauty, we get the answer to why she remains one of the most celebrated wives of great rulers in all of modern history.